we're going to still have that funding for another 5 years. And so that's, I want to say, like, I don't know too much, but I'm probably willing to bet that Dr. Warrior had a little part to do with that, as well as Mr. Blackhawk in the back there, getting our department funding stabilized and there for our relatives. So a lot of hard work goes into those grants, and a lot of many people to thank, but we're real grateful that we're going to continue to do good things, because tribal TANF and child welfare is two major programs that we're operating here in the community under federal and state funding, and it's a difficult job, but it's a job that we've seen progress on in our lifetime, but there's still a lot of work to do to get all of our families strong again, and all of our future generations strong and healed. I guess is the only way we can really put it, is when you look at it from the perspective of the historical trauma and intergenerational trauma. It's like they say there's 5 stages of grief, and I think when you look at some of the information with the intergenerational trauma, you'll see that there's many stages in intergenerational trauma too, and we've seen that, we've experienced it, and we see that within the clients that we work with, in trying to help them to overcome that and to become productive, and basically to become like I know about a month or two ago there was an email that was going around, and there was the tribal council email. There was a program somewhere that was doing something, and the tribal community said that it was teaching people how to be a good relative, and that's very, very simple right there, what I just said, right? To teach people how to be a good relative, but it's hard when you have the addictions and the substance abuse and the violence and the things that we're dealing with on a daily basis, with having loss of our identity and culture, loss of our ability to be productive as men. As you look at the welfare system, is kind of taken the man out of the family, or are awarded or subsidized families that are fatherless, and I think we all know that that's part of the problem. That would another way, like, there's a lot of different ways you can go at solving problems, and that's certainly part of it as well. And we have a really good group of people working in all of our programs that are operating the fatherhood is sacred trainings in the community, and motherhood is sacred. So I feel like we're really on a really good path towards making the world better than the way that we found it. I think that right there is like a primary cultural thought, or feeling, or way of life, I guess, is to always try to make things better, to find a way to make things better. Whether it was like how last week we were told by Faith Spotted Eagle that it was very important, the rules of taking care of your camp, and the protocols that were all within your camp. We were really good relatives. We're very generous people. There was very little theft. We all had respect for one another. and we all cared for each other. And that's kind of, I think everything that we do every day, we're all trying to get back to that. And so I want to say thank you to Dr. Warrior for coming out to teach us a little bit more about this subject. So without further ado here, so come on up.
Okay, can you all hear me through the microphone? Okay, I do have some handouts, and I apologize. I should have shared these earlier, so I'm going to make sure I get these out. What I do want to share is that we are going to be spending a lot of time talking about historical trauma, but we're really going to focus on how it can impact us in the workplace. And for me, the type of presentations that I do, thank you. When I do presentations, they're usually a call to action. And as a lifelong student and as a former college instructor, things that are important to me is making sure that we can apply what we learn. So we're not just sitting and listening, we're going to be doing some action. So there will be a lot of discussion. But the other important thing about that is we're going to be tapping into collective wisdom, because everyone here has wisdom about their history, about interactions, about being healthy, about being unhealthy. We all have knowledge that we can share with one another to help one another. And that's something that I value wholeheartedly. It's inappropriate for me to go to a community and tell them, this is how you work on things, this is how you make things better, without hearing from the community on what is better for you. That's important to me as a psychologist as well, because when people come into our office to work with us, am I trying to make them fit into what I see as healthy or what they see as healthy? So those are important things for us to keep in mind. So when I do the presentations, it's definitely a call to action, but it's based on what you see as appropriate, okay? So let's see. Okay. So the official title of today's presentation is Generational Trauma and its Effects on Workplace Productivity, but we're going to go through a lot of things when we cover this. So to start off by introducing myself, I'm Ponca from the Ponca tribe of Oklahoma. That's where I grew up and married my husband, Travis Mallory, over 20 years ago. I think we're at about 24 years now. And so we've lived here in Winnebago and Lincoln and have kind of gone back and forth, and we're back in Winnebago now. Very happy to be here. My roles in my life that are more important to me than being a psychologist are that of a daughter, sister, mother, aunt, wife, and grandmother. Now, I will tell you this. As a grandmother, I am loving that role. And sometimes I might talk more than I should because I have that grandma role, or I might try to discipline more than I should, but I'm loving being a grandmother. And so we go home quite a bit to dance with our people, be in our community events. And so this is a picture of me and my youngest daughter, Samantha, and we're with a few of my brothers and a couple of uncles, and they're part of the Heloshka Society there in Oklahoma. And what I love about them and sharing is that their role within our community is to really take care of others. So just for example, if we have a funeral, they are there. They are bringing blankets, they are helping with cooking. If someone wants to learn to dance or make regalia, they're going to help them. Like they make connections, they take care of you, and it's just really an honor to be connected to them and know that this is something that is continuing within our community. So very thankful for that. My personal interest in psychology, I share this story almost every time I give a presentation because I think it's so important for people to understand the differences in the Western worldview versus how we as Native people heal, the way we grieve, the way we live. They can clash at times. So I mentioned I grew up in Oklahoma, and I had moved to Moore, Oklahoma, which is a suburb of Oklahoma City. And I lived there with my 3 children, so I was a single mom with 3 babies, and we had a tornado that came through in 1999, and it completely demolished our home. Actually, almost half the town was gone, and so my daughter, who was 4 at the time, had sustained some serious, serious injuries, and she wasn't able to survive. So she passed away, and I had some really significant injuries that make that time of my life kind of difficult to remember. So I started working with some therapists because, as you could imagine, as a single mom, a young single mom, I was not making good decisions. I was moving a lot, not making good choices in terms of being healthy. I was drinking more than I should, and then I would get lost in my grief. And so I started trying to get on track and started meeting with therapists. But when I would talk about anything spiritual, anything that was happening in my home that we observed, that is PTSD with psychosis, and we need to look at your medication. So basically, what was happening to me while I was in therapy was the Ponca part of me was being medicated to shut that part of me down. And it made it really confusing to me. This is who we are. This is real, but you're telling me I need medication for this? And so it did not work. And so they ended up doing more harm than good by seeing this therapist who had no understanding or respect for my culture as a Ponca woman. So then I decided from that experience, I'm going to become a psychologist and work with people and train others to be able to work with our communities. And that's how we started Morning Star Counseling. And we actually started it here in Winnebago in 2012. And our first bit of work started here at Winnebago Public Schools. And we are still there, so very, very thankful for the community and all the resources that we've been able to tap into. Kevin. See, that's the grandma. Okay, so with our objectives today, we have a lot that we're going to cover. And although we got a late start today, I think we can get through everything. We might cut some of our activities a little bit shorter to make sure we get through all of the content. So we're going to talk about historical and generational trauma, because those are 2 different things. We're going to talk about how this can impact us in our workplaces. Then we're going to discuss some communication styles. The other piece that I really want everyone to take, and I only have a few slides on this, but this is a term that I really want everyone to hold on to, and this is post-traumatic growth. Has anyone heard that term before, post-traumatic growth? Okay. We're going to spend some time on that and look at what that means for us, because even using the term post can be really difficult because there are still so many traumas that are happening now for us. So we'll spend some time on that, but that's definitely a term I want everyone to leave with today. We'll also look at some leadership styles, and then we'll talk about supervision and how we provide supervision, ways to provide supervision from a decolonized lens. We'll also do some action planning. Remember, because I said when I do presentations, we're looking at a call to action, like what's going to change as a result of this. And then, of course, we'll go through some self-care, but the other piece is organizational care. So our employers can talk to us about self-care. You need to take care of yourself, but what changes is the organization making to fully support that. Okay, so we'll talk about some of that, and that will also be included in the decolonized supervision. Okay, because we're going to be talking about such really important and intimate topics, I want to make sure that we have group norms for us, that we recognize that this is a safe space. Although it is being live streamed, it's still going to be safe for us to share within here. So I don't know how everyone would feel about that. I'm okay with it being live streamed. I don't know how you all feel. So if there is even one person that does not want it live streamed, if you just do this or something and let us know, we can turn it off. Okay. So safety is going to be something that's important for us in what we share today, and making sure that Inclusion is also a part of that. And with inclusion, we want to make sure everybody has a voice. Everyone does have a voice, and we want to hear it. That is going to be part of how we decolonize this and value your collective wisdom. The other piece is choice. And with choice, that would mean if I choose not to participate in an activity, then I choose not to participate. And that's your choice. That's having a trauma-informed approach when you have choice, okay? Because our choice is taken away from us when we experience trauma. I didn't choose to go through the tornado, but it happened to me, and that was out of my control. So choice is going to be huge when we look at trauma-informed approaches. And then respect. Respect for all the differences that we have, our lived experience, our history. So we want to make sure that we have that respect for everyone, what they share, what they choose, and how they feel safe, okay? I'll go back to these a few times just because I think they're so important. So throughout the presentation today, we'll go back and just kind of do a reminder on what our group norms are. Besides these four, are there any other group norms that we need to have for us as we move through this presentation today? Okay. Yeah, we could definitely add listening to that. Thank you. Okay. All right. So culture matters in everything that we do with who we are. And within my tribe, giving away is something that we do all the time. You know, I was very fortunate to go home for our Standing Bear Powwow this past weekend, and it was a lot of fun getting the baskets together, deciding who we want to give to, doing our gourd dance where we honor people and give away a lot of things. And there's an altruistic notion behind that where it feels good to just be taking care of one another and sharing. And sometimes it's giving basic needs. Sometimes it's helping with regalia, or it could be so many things, but it's very customary for us to give. So my grandfather, Lewis Hedman, wrote this book, and it's called Walks on the Ground, and it talks about a lot of things that are specific to the Ponca culture. But one of the things that he talks about is the giveaway, and how that can be, there's 4 times typically that we give away. So you can do it at any time, just as, wanting to share. The other time is when you want someone to have something. So when I was a teenager and I was dancing, I was making my stuff by hand, and I would show up with my little sisters because I always had to babysit, and we'd be walking, and then I'd have my regalia in a paper sack. And some elders felt bad for me, and so they wanted me to have, something good to carry my things in to keep them clean and, just take care of them in a better way than in a paper sack. And so they got things for me, and that was because they wanted me to have those to support me. Sometimes we give away, and typically in our culture, when someone passes away, we would give everything away. What we didn't give away, we would burn. And there's, cultural significance to that and why that happens. But then also with that, again, of the deceased, the person who did pass away, sometimes giving away their items as well. So for me, when I do presentations, I like for us to do giveaways. And so in the back, I have a lot of different arts and crafts material. So I want us to have about 5 minutes to let everyone go up and grab something so you can create as we're going through the presentation, but putting good intentions behind that. This could be a card, it could be something that you create with the Play-Doh, it could be something that you draw, but there's quite a few items up there to be creative, just to show thanks. And at the end of the presentation, we'll share which person we would like to give away to. I would like to encourage you all to give to another staff person, but you can definitely give it to family, give it to your children, a colleague, a friend, but just want to take that time to share who we are and be able to give. So let's take about 5 minutes to let everyone go up to the back row and get some items so you can create for our giveaway. Okay, we can start making our way back to our seats. We'll get started with some content. So I'm going to read directly from the slides, but I also want to share a reason that I read directly from the slides. Sometimes most of the time we are trained to not do that when we're providing professional presentations. There's a form of implicit bias in that when we don't read from the slides. I'm making this expectation or making an assumption that everyone can see this clearly, that everyone can read at the same level, that everyone can process what I'm saying while attempting to read this. So we're not going to do that. We're going to read directly from the slide. And there are a few of the slides that you will have This one, no, you don't have this one. But if you do put your email in there on the sign-in sheet, and if you'd like a copy of the presentation, we can absolutely send that out to you. So why is this important? From family scars to organizational dysfunction, generational trauma can stem from various experiences, including war, abuse, racism, or historical oppression. These events leave deep scars that unconsciously shape behaviors and communication patterns within families. The same is true for organizations, particularly when viewed as a kind of family, with hierarchical structures mirroring generations. The ripple effect and how trauma travels down the hierarchy. So think of a workplace with a manager who constantly criticizes or micromanages, similar to a parent using harsh words. This creates a culture of fear and negativity that affects everyone. Employees under constant pressure can this is part of it's cut off, but can experience significant stressors, including emotional distress. So this is what we're seeing from dysfunction that can start in families that can sometimes have been passed down from generation to generation, and now it comes through in how we work with one another. I've talked with people who have shared with me almost experiencing PTSD because of how their managers or their program directors have treated them, to where even the smell of something will cause them to have stomach aches because it makes them think of their time with that particular director. Okay. How would you explain, so this is going to be a question to the group, communication within your organization? Does it feel safe, or is there sometimes challenges because of the generational differences or the hierarchy that's there? Any challenges with communication? Maybe not in your direct program, but in other programs that you've seen. Yeah.
Ours is kind of done with the group chat. We really don't express what we really mean, how we feel.
Mm.
We just send it back.
Mm.
People really don't know all the importance of it.
Mm. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. So if you didn't hear, he had shared that within their group, it's a group text that they share. And there's pros and cons to that, because it's really convenient to be able to get the message out to everyone, but we can't always interpret the emotion behind those texts. So there are pros and cons, but it can still be a really effective way of communicating. What might we see with the ripple effect? Because one of the things that we just shared is historical oppression. And when we talk about oppression, what does that mean? If someone's oppressed, this is kind of like we're holding them down, we're holding them back. Absolutely, absolutely. So how could we see that in an organization, especially when we look at tribal organizations and how close-knit they are? Do we see oppression within our own communities? Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. So she mentioned gatekeepers, and sometimes it depends on who your family is, and all of that can come into play. And I completely agree, and we see that across multiple tribal organizations. Let's see here.
I think if you have like a bad day at work, then you're probably going to go home and have a bad evening with family, maybe, or vice versa.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like you could leave one environment and go to the other. It could be good things too.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the negativity travels as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It stays with you, and it's shared with other people that are around you. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to go into more detail on this. One of the things that I want to share quickly about oppression is there is something that's called internalized oppression. And when we internalize oppression, what we think is we have to identify with the oppressor. We have to identify with the one who is in power. And the way that I identify with the one who is in power is I keep everybody down here. I'll cut off their dreams, the things they're working towards. I'll be the gatekeeper, and I'm the one who has the decision. And that's the way that I've overcome oppression, is by becoming the oppressor. And sometimes we see that in the way that we manage things, the way that we work with one another. So when we see someone get some authority or power, I've heard statements like, it's just going to their head. That can be part of that internalized oppression. And so they're trying to fulfill something within themselves because of the oppression that they've experienced themselves. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. One way that we can overcome that is how we recognize one another and how we share. Kevin. Thank you. So what we're going to do is practice this, being able to highlight the skills of others, something good of other people, because it's very easy to go down the rabbit hole of things that aren't working within our tribes, things that have created conflict, pointing out the negative. That's a really easy trap to fall into, but being able to celebrate someone and share some of their accomplishments is something that we want to be able to do to challenge those times that we've experienced depression. And we want to make this something that's more formal for us in the way that we interact with one another. So I know this is very small, but you all do have a copy of this slide in your handouts. And this is an appreciative interview. So what we're going to do is break into groups of 2, and we're going to learn about one another. And we're going to focus on teamwork. So we want to be able to highlight a time that you felt very engaged, successful, and valued, but also proud of some teamwork that you were a part of. Each of you will have time to share about some teamwork where you were successful, you felt valued, you were proud of that teamwork, whether you led it or you were a part of the team. I want you to share an experience that you had. Share that with whoever is in your group. And then for the person who's listening, we want you to have some active listening skills. Sometimes that can mean nodding. That can be follow-up questions. That can also be your body language. But ask things like, what was happening? Who was involved? Why was this meaningful for you? And what strengths did you use? Then we want to be able to tie this into values. So for example, if we were talking about a team that, being part of a team that was giving something away to the community, then it can be like, that's a ho-chunk value with giving, or that's a Ponca value with giving, and really being engaged in the conversation, okay? And then, once we finish that, you all will get the opportunity to introduce your partner and celebrate them in terms of what they accomplished with teamwork, okay? So this will take about 20 minutes for us to sit with our groups. We might shorten it a little bit just because of time. So we're going to take some time to break into groups of 2. So we might have to move some seats a little bit, but groups of 2. And you have everyone has this as a handout to be able to share. Okay, so let this be your guiding document. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and break into our groups, and maybe we'll check in about 15 minutes in. If we have one extra, you can hop in with another group. If we do 3, that's fine. Okay, let's plan to go just about 3 more minutes. 3 more minutes. We have 1 more minute. Okay, let's start coming together and we're going to go throughout the room and have each of you introduce or share something that you've learned about the person in your group. You know, this practice is actually done with with the United Nations, and it's part of being able to celebrate one another. You know, because in a lot of our teachings, we definitely don't boast about ourselves, but it's good to hear others share things about us. It's also a really good way for us to connect and learn things about each other and the good things that are happening. And so when you hear it, think about how that feels for you when someone's sharing something to celebrate you, okay? So would any of the groups be interested in starting? Yes, thank you.
Check, 1, 2. Give me a beat.
I'm just kidding. This is Ira Rave, our coworker in the employment section of our human services department, and Ira came about a month and a half ago, about a month ago, and one of his supervisor was on her way out to have a baby. And so he kind of just was learning a little bit. And then his other partner in that department, she was out for surgery.
Mm.
And so he was kind of there by himself, but he did a really good job when his team got together during one of the sessions, one of their weekly meetings, and he asked the question, what are we going to do about the time management class? And the team was all like, well, you're going to do it, you know? And he went ahead and he did it. He did it successfully, but he used his critical thinking skills about how much time it would take and different things like that. So I think he really did good for not knowing and kind of was told, oh, just hold on, you know, a little while, but got thrown into this, but had a really good outcome for it. So I think he should be proud of himself for doing that.
Yes, awesome. Thank you. Okay, and Ira, can you share about her?
Oh, there we go. Oh, nice. I could write. Um, okay, she talked about the teamwork to get her and Kayla's grant renewed and how it took 6 days and nights. Um, and just how she was really engaged in this and a lot of emails and questions, and she said grants and going through the whole process is a lot. And the strengths she used was brains and experience from her life and education, and asked herself, what work do I want to accomplish in this? And that's it.
And she was successful with the grant.
And she was successful. with the
Yes.
grant. 5 more years.
Thank you. You all? Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Right there. Here. Hi, I'm Brandy. I had just graduated with my bachelor's degree from social work, and so I want to get this done and over with. So I like going first. So let me go ahead and stand. So we have 3 in our group, and this is Jeanette. She actually works with the tribal courts. We didn't get into job titles, paralegal, pre-trial liaison, and she's very well adversed, and she does a lot. Jeanette does a lot of volunteer work. She is a passionate activist. She gets involved in her personal time outside of work. Jeanette is also well traveled. We've gone overseas together. We actually spent time in middle school and high school together. So it's really interesting that we found each other in the same work area. And I had seen her walking. I said, "You should come over, come check this out." So I'm glad she's here, and she's got a good heart and a good mind, and I know she'll do well in her field. And she's recently hired, so she's currently learning all the different co-facilitators, departments, the people that we work with, and I'm glad she's here. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Hello, my name's Janet. I just met Jackie. She said one of her best jobs that she has had was paralegal. She worked with juveniles and just juveniles, and she enjoyed their teamwork with the attorneys and the paralegal. Was there more than one paralegal? So the whole team, she learned the best skill was listening to each of her clients. So that and note taking as well. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
I am Jackie Little George, and I am introducing Brandy Baker, who is currently I think she's on contract right now, working with Human Services, and that I'm doing a transition. Excuse me. And so I really liked when she talked about herself and said that she's proud of herself. You know, for choices that she's made, changes that she's made, the things that she's learned. She said she kind of grew up stereotypical, you know, being a stereotype and things like that, but wanting to get out of that and trying to get away from that and everything. Her intention and life goal was always to do good. So, so she has done that and proved herself well through all of that. She's proud of the choices that she has made, learned from the ones that, you know, that taught her good lessons, you know, and everything like that. So those kind of different things in getting through school. She's enjoying what she's doing today, the things that she's learning, the people, the partnerships, and all of that. So she's been able to get a lot of experience and knowledge from the things that she's doing. One of the things she likes to do a lot, which comes, I think, a lot on the different areas in her life and helps her in many ways, is into sewing. You know, she's a good seamstress and very creative. Um, so I think that's pretty much what it is. She gets into volunteering as well. She loves to do volunteer work and everything. And I know she works a lot with youth. You're volunteering's a lot with youth, right? Yeah. So she does that. So, and she mentioned, remember how it takes a village to raise a child? So she listed different people in her life who have helped her, encouraged her, and lifted her.
Thank you.
Do you guys want to go next?
Okay. I have with me is Christy Walker, otherwise known as Cree. One of the things that she wanted to mention what was happening was being a part of the auxiliary here in Winnebago. And then she's our treasurer secretary. And then also it's because of our annual homecoming celebration where we honor our veterans. And we provide the meal, the auxiliary. And in that, who was involved was all our auxiliary members, the community, our veterans, of course, and all of our people visiting. And then what made this meaningful for her was because of the many relatives who served in the military, especially our own, you know, father and grandfathers, yeah, everybody, you know, in our family that served in whichever branch. And then the strengths of that she used was just that of her love for our family, you know, and giving back and being a part of all of those things. And then the values in that was to honor and respect their sacrifice and also to remember them. So that was a time that she mentioned. So yeah, and then other things with work could be like when they had the back to school event, you know, with the health department and so forth, all of that, and seeing the kids' faces and all of that when they receive the backpacks or whatever else it may have been, being a part of that and then giving back to our community. So
Thank you.
yeah. Okay, I have this is my sister Angie Walker, and then the one that she had mentioned, one of the ones was work when she was working at the court, and then what was happening was being a part of the special project prosecuting team that they had there and working with the victims. Who was involved was the U.S. attorneys, the investigator, CI, law enforcement, tribal prosecutor. What made this meaningful for her was assisting the victims, helping them. What strengths did you use? The having the empathy for the victim, and all the team that was involved knew like to help this person. And the values was like working together to have the victim feel safe and heard and getting them the help that they needed. And yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and everybody knew their roles
Okay.
that they played a part in.
Awesome. Thank you.
This is Anthony Ware Jr., right? Anthony Ware? Anthony Ware. He's a single father to 5 children, and he is a foster parent to 2 nieces. And the thing that he feels really good about is last year he became a coach for basketball for the 6th grader girls. And they were like the underdogs, and some of them were his relatives, a couple of his nieces. And he said it wasn't really a lot, but they ended up winning, kind of a lot of games. And so he was real proud of them. And also, um, the girls, they knew that they could play ball. And they're part of he feels like all of the team were, like became his relatives, his nieces. And he still sees them, and they're in the 7th grade. And his biggest thing was trying to motivate them and be encouraging them and let them know that they had the abilities to play basketball. And he said it was real meaningful to him because he explained that when he was growing up, he went to boarding school, and like from the 7th to the 12th grade, and there was nobody there to like teach him, or coach him in basketball. And so it was like a real fulfilling thing for him. And the thing about that, I was explaining to him last week, we had Faith Spotted Eagle here, and then a lot of my men relatives, they tell us that each one of us, we all come from Moona, and we all have a gift. And part of our teachings and the way that we are is that because we didn't have, history books or write things down, we always passed on everything through oral history. So we try to teach and show our relatives whatever we learned or whatever gift that we have. His might be coaching and encouraging them, and having them play as a team, and just boosting up their esteem to know that they could play basketball. And in 6th grade, they're so impressionable at that age. So I think that that's really something, and that's what I was telling him. That's part of our teachings, is that we're supposed to share what we know, and it isn't as coming out as a know-it-all. Because like what you said, we're not supposed to say, "Oh, I did this and I did that." We were all taught to be humble, but whatever we know, we have to try to show them. Like if it's sewing or if it's making fry bread, like Miss School, knee school, knee schoolga. I said, tell them when you stand up and talk, tell them your name is School. School, yeah. In Dakota, it means sweet. So he told me, he said, knee school, like that means salt. But you're salt of the earth, too. That's really valuable also. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nana. She's gonna have a better one than me. She's a real good listener, really engaging, active listener. So, thank you. I'm working on my skills still. So, this is Nana. She expressed to me that she was involved in a summer youth language program back in the day when it first got started for Renaissance language. She said that she was helping out with the basics, posters, and but she helped out with the language and to our younger relatives, and she like she said she took the quote last week from the lady about contributing our gifts. We all have gifts, and hers was, giving back to the community with her skills of knowledge of the language and stuff. So, and we kind of talked about that um, a little bit about growing up and how it was. Nowadays, it's improved our community, our sports, the language. I think our children have more guidance now to um, their life as healthy adults now more than we did back then. It's real healing to see and hear that she's been doing and helping, giving back like that. Um, I had a question for her. I said because my grandmother Sandra, she knows the language, she hears it, she understands it, but that she has trouble speaking it nowadays. So I asked her, do you think that's part of that trauma that when they were told not to speak their language, she might have some kind of uh, you know problem there, speaking it. So there's a lot of things I see around here that are very healing and pleasing to see and to hear. So yeah, thanks, Nona, for expressing that on my behalf. And I'm sorry if I shortcomed you a little bit on this. Yeah, it was we were engaged and it was pretty good talk. So thank you.
Yeah, that was really good. Thank you. Thank you both. Okay, we have
Who's
a
next?
couple more groups, if you all would be so kind as to share. And remember, we have choice. If you're choosing not to share,
Come
that's
on
okay.
down.
I'm not going to stand, but this is Miracle, and she expressed to me that one of her experiences was working at Scooters when her supervisor was pregnant and left, or having a baby and had to leave, and she was left with a bunch of high school students that didn't want to listen. So she had to use her leadership skills. Um, and communication and multitasking. So she was really proud of it.
Awesome. Thank you.
This is Lily. She expressed to me that one of the experiences she had is her niece is involved in CFS, and I do work for CFS. So she said it was, she was nervous. Obviously, you kind of have to trust your child in somebody else's hands and expect them to make good decisions that they know will help the child in the end. She got to go see Red Circle Lodge, which is one of the places that we do send kids to for them to get a little extra help. Um, so one of our CFS workers was involved. Red Circle are the people at Red Circle Lodge. She expressed that she had sort of a similar experience, so that kind of made her a little iffy. But she really liked because, like I said, she had a similar experience and she's able to help her niece and help her heal. And some of the skills that she used is like being compassionate, understanding, and being open minded. That's all.
Thank you.
My turn. I'm just kidding. Who does this go to? Oh, but you guys are right next to me.
Hello, everybody. My name is Angel. This is Ava Springer. She is from the Omaha tribe, and she works with us within the CFS department. She's one of our case aides. Ava's best experience that she had shared with me was whenever she worked for a daycare in Walt Hill. She said that the lead teacher was pregnant and went on maternity leave, and she had to take on the lead role. And she said it just made her feel really, really good about herself because she had no experience in what she was doing, but she felt like it just came natural to her. She said that she had a lot of good feedback from her coworkers, the parents, And she said it's like one of the best experience just because of the fact that I didn't have that experience as a lead teacher. And I could honestly see it because Ava is very independent. She's very strong. You know, her personality. She's always willing to do anything that's asked of her. Like she's um she she's very open minded. Like anything that you bring to her, she may not. She's like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm willing to do it. Like, you know, just show me, you know, give me an insight. I remember for a parade for homecoming, I think it was last year. I'm like, Ava, we gotta make what is it? I think a rainbow or something. I can't remember what it was, and she's like, I was like, you know how to draw? She's like, no, I don't, but I found out she does know how to draw. But she we met that challenge, and I just like the fact that we can go to her and just ask her for help on anything, and she's willing to do it. It's never, you know, no, I can't, or I don't know how to do that, or I'm too afraid. She's willing to jump on it, and I really like that about Ava. And I could see it with her daycare experience. And that's it.
Thank you.
I know. Jeez. Angel's the best. No, no, I really love Angel. She said that she feels most engaged and valued working with CFS and helping the youth within our program and coming across some of those who are challenged and have it a lot harder than others. She's also an intake clerk, but when I'm not able to like do my job or I'm busy doing another transport, she steps up and does my job role, and I'm so grateful for her. And she's just like another family that I've taken in at work. She's the best, and her personality, oh my gosh, like she's just the best. I'm gonna cry. No, yes, but she's just the bestest friend you could ever have, and like having her at work, she just brightens up the work environment. She's just someone that you would like to have around, especially when you're down in the dumps. She can really cheer you up, and she can just relate to you. But yeah.
Thank you. Okay, we have one last group if you're willing to share. All right.
Are you gonna go or me? Hello, everyone. I don't like public speaking at all, so I'm gonna look this way. But my name is Sanaya, and I teamed up with my boss, Musku. So I'm gonna make this real good. No, he talked about a proud moment that he had. His oldest daughter graduated, and they went to a powwow back at home, and they honored her with a really nice star quilt. And it just made him feel really proud, and he wanted to give back, like most natives do. They when they feel really good, they want to give back and give that joy to more people. So him and his wife and his family decided that they were gonna feed the people at the powwow the next year. So they fundraised all year, and they worked with family members to provide a meal that Saturday, and they fed 180 people.
Wow.
Musku said it was the best pulled pork anybody's ever had. But they managed to work with some of the departments back at home and get the food cooked because it is 4 hours away. So it was kind of a journey to get the food there and cook it and serve them. But it ended up being really good. And so that was his wopila, or like giving back to honor the people for honoring his daughter.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Sanaya. And Sanaya, my employee. No, just Sanaya's one of our managers at Human Services. She's just like Ava. They said she brightens up the day, and that's what Sanaya does for us too. So she told me about a time that she worked in a teamwork environment with her former job, and the store that she worked for, it was a C store, but it was in a community that didn't have a whole lot of options for, with transportation issues and things like that. So the first thing she had to do was rebuild the staff, and then she sought input from the staff, which was very a very good move for her to make sure that the change that she was implementing would take hold. She didn't have all the ideas, or she wasn't micromanaging, but she asked those that worked in the store, like, what items do you think would benefit the community? And so when she used that input from them and filled the shelves with that product, it moved quicker, and it served the community better. Like, it had a ripple effect of making the purpose of the store more successful, and it led to transforming the store and getting a new freezer and a refrigerator, just to make sure that they can provide that service to people that lack transportation. So she really brought a lot of people together and influenced change and managed that change. And at the end of it, they had a little dinner together, but her staff, they all kind of like pitched in and gave her a gift. And so that was very, very cherished gift that she received, and it was like unexpected, and she was very just grateful for that experience of being a part of something that resulted in. It took a lot of teamwork, but it also made a big difference. So, yep.
All right, thank you. Okay, so with what everyone shared, I want us to think about this as a foundation for moving forward. The qualities or the attributes that were shared throughout this, so across the group, I heard about initiative, problem solving, communication skills, empathy, willingness to learn, collaboration, leadership, family values, perseverance, and gratitude. And that's just what I heard. So you all might have heard way more from other people here. And so use that as a foundation, because this is something that when we lean into these skills, we lean into these positive attributes as a team, as a community, that helps us overcome oppression. That helps us overcome trauma and grow beyond that. So we won't allow ourselves to be identified by the trauma only. Okay, so this is a really important activity that you can do even in staff meetings or even just in your family to celebrate one another. Would anyone be willing to share how this felt for them? Share as hearing it and share as saying it, saying good things about what you did. No. Okay, let's move on then, because I know we have lunch coming here. So let's talk about move now into a different direction, but I want you to keep that foundation as we move forward, okay? So for trauma, there's a lot of information about trauma, and over the past 20 years, trauma has been coming up more and more, because before it wasn't acknowledged at the level that it is now. So SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, describes trauma as an event or circumstance resulting in physical harm, emotional harm, and or life-threatening harm. The event or circumstance has lasting effects on the individual's mental health, physical health, emotional health, social well-being, and or their physical well-being. Essentially, trauma is an event that overwhelms a person's capacity to cope, okay? There are so many different types of trauma, but the Crisis Prevention Institute identifies 3: acute, chronic, and complex. So acute would be a single overwhelming event like a car accident, a natural disaster, or a death. The chronic would be long-term exposure to traumatic events. So this could be violence, bullying, multiple out-of-home placements. And then we have complex traumatic with long-term effects. So this could be a mass casualty, refugee dislocation, or boarding schools. One thing that they don't include is historical trauma and how historical trauma can be any of these, okay? Because if we're looking at substance abuse as a result of historical trauma and we have the single event, it's still stemming from that historical trauma because we're using substances to kind of ease the pain, which unfortunately it actually has the opposite effect. When you're drinking alcohol, it can take you up to a certain level with feeling good, but then it's actually a depressant and it will start to bring you down. So we can start to see people getting upset, getting angry to protect themselves, a lot of crying. Those things can happen when we increase the drinking. So all of these can be tied into historical trauma, all 3 types. The other piece to note on trauma is secondary and vicarious trauma. Have you all heard of both of those terms? Yeah, so sometimes they get used kind of interchangeably, but they are actually different. So with secondary trauma, that's a direct result of witnessing or being involved in an event. It has a sudden and intense emotional response, and it will feel similar to PTSD. With vicarious trauma, this is going to be prolonged or repeated exposure to traumatic experiences of others. It's a gradual increase in emotional distress, and it also is similar to PTSD. The major differences with those are going to be the time frame, the direct involvement, and the accumulation of stress. Okay? These 2 are really important, especially for our people in human services field, for educators. And I think in our approach, when we think about first responders, we have to expand that beyond, those who are showing up as like the EMTs. Our caseworkers are also first responders. Sometimes I've seen where they've been the first on the scene to something major that's happened with our children. Teachers are also a form of first responders because they sometimes learn about the event or see events happen at school. And with the way our schools have changed across the country, these are things that we really have to be aware of. And when we're working in the human services field, vicarious trauma, where there's that prolonged exposure without having ways to cope with what we experience, can lead to PTSD or just that feeling of vicarious trauma, but also burnout. That's a really important thing that we have to keep in mind because when we're experiencing burnout, it's like we just lose energy. We don't have the motivation to move forward, and that can impact us personally as well, and how we engage with our family, what we're willing to do. It can almost feel like a form of depression when we experience burnout, but you don't have that motivation to move forward in your job, and you can start to withdraw a bit. So in addition to the types of trauma that were described with the acute, chronic, we also have the secondary, vicarious trauma, but there's that overarching umbrella, essentially, of historical trauma. Yeah. So for us specifically, that's going to be really hard to see, and I don't think I put a copy of that one in there. With historical trauma and the impacts, for us specifically as Native people, historical trauma was one of the most systematic and successful programs of ethnic cleansing the world has seen. Part of that is because it was also very intentional with how that was done. This included relocation, starving, neglecting people, and being forbidden to practice any religious beliefs. Children were taken from them, our people, and re-educated so that their language, culture, and kinship patterns were lost to them. There was no safe place to return or immigrate to. All were forced to relocate to areas that had no economic value to Europeans. Reservation residents were dependent on the government for food, shelter, and health care. Traditional ways were eradicated, and residents were forced to learn new ways of surviving that was often against cultural beliefs and practices, or impossible given the quality of lands they were placed upon. So I went through that pretty quickly on the things that have happened in our history that had led to what we call historical trauma. What we're seeing in people who have experienced this type of trauma is a change that happens within our bodies. And this is coming in terms of what is actually passed down through our DNA and how genes express themselves. So what that means basically is one study that I'll reference is regarding those who survived the Holocaust. And they had these biological markers that were heightened for stress, for PTSD, for anxiety. And what we're seeing is that the children of those people who were the survivors are more likely to have PTSD, anxiety, and depression. So they're more predisposed to experience those things. That's not their fault. That's not because they did something wrong. That was just what was happening within the body of the individual who was in the Holocaust. So it changes. And these things can start in utero. The baby will feel everything that the mother is feeling. So when we're experiencing trauma or we're being relocated, all of those things will be something that the babies will feel, and that can manifest in different ways as they grow older. Now, if we develop coping skills, we have good communication skills, we're open and honest, they have support, we can work through that. So it's not a guarantee. We're not saying, if you've experienced historical trauma, you have PTSD or you're going to have PTSD. But the likelihood of it would definitely increase, okay? But it does not mean that you will absolutely have it, but your genes are predisposed to that. Any questions or thoughts on this in our history? This is a really introductory piece to it because there are so many other pieces that come along with historical trauma and our history. But the impact that we see now is where we have lateral violence that includes some of that oppression, how we identify with the oppressor and we hold the people back. So now I can feel like I'm up there with a person who has the authority to oppress. It's intentional. The intergenerational trauma. So the historical trauma is the events that have happened. The intergenerational trauma is what's being passed as a result. So if we'll talk more about this a little bit later, but in boarding schools, not knowing how to connect, that's going to be something that's going to be passed on to our children, not knowing how to connect. Social determinants of health, education. This could be education, finances, housing, and how that view of those determinants of health have changed. When people, some of the research says, when people increase their education levels, they're more likely to be engaged with the healthcare system in terms of taking care of their health, being proactive in that. That's something that's a social determinant of health. This impacts us because we don't always have the trust for our medical providers. We don't always have the trust for people that we go to. There was a reason that I struggled with counseling because I couldn't trust that person. There can be fear of they're here just to take our kids. The same can apply to education. I remember talking with someone here, and one of the things she shared was, every time I see that building, I just think about what I went through when I was a kid and what that nun did to me. And that's going to impact their engagement with their children. If their children struggle in school, need help, they need to have the grandmother be part of the school and coming in and meeting with the teachers. That's going to be really difficult. So that's how it can trickle down to the social determinants of health. And then, of course, our health disparities. And that's going to come down to just what we've learned to adapt to in terms of what we're eating and how we're taking care of ourselves, our physical activity, and especially with the changes in our society right now, that we are a lot more sedentary than what we used to be. And all of this are going to be contributing factors to the impacts in the workplace. Any questions or feedback on that? Okay. So now let's look at intergenerational trauma. It's the transmission of historical trauma effects across generations. It manifests in various ways, including psychological issues like depression and anxiety, substance abuse, and difficulties in forming healthy relationships. This type of trauma can be passed down through behavioral patterns and even genetic changes, as suggested by some research. So these are going to be different parenting styles that people have learned. This will be how we communicate with one another, but it's not going to be just within the family. Because if one thing I'll share is with anger. Have you all heard of anger as a secondary emotion? Yeah. So a lot of times we use anger as a secondary emotion. And what that means is that it's covering up a different emotion. So sometimes when I'm doing my work with kids and we talk about what's behind the anger, I get really animated when I'm working with kids, but I will share with them, like if I'm walking and I trip and I fall, and then you start laughing at me, then I hop up and I'm gonna push you and I'm gonna be like, shut up, and the anger's gonna come out, okay? But what I'm really feeling is embarrassment and shame. But the anger is that protective emotion. So that's all you're gonna see is the anger. If I let you see my embarrassment or my shame, then that's gonna mean I'm vulnerable. That's gonna mean I'm weak. Those are the things that have been interpreted based on my family history. Okay, so anger can be a secondary emotion, and sometimes we are just angry, and we have that right to be angry about different things. But when we think about who we're working with, our clients, our relatives that we're serving, when they're coming in to receive services and they're already angry, guess what? Chances are they're probably protecting themselves. And they're probably, more than likely, covering up another emotion, covering up another state of mind. Okay, so that's really important for us to keep in mind when we're working with our relatives, but also within our workplace. Okay. Thoughts or feedback on that? Yes. So I would want to be very cautious about going into anything personal. I don't know who your daughter is right now, so you would have to help me remember, but I'd rather that we spoke about that privately, if you're comfortable with that. Okay. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Any other feedback? Something I want us to remember when we're talking about intergenerational trauma is that the things that we do are coming from a way of protecting ourselves. And what can happen is our solutions end up becoming our problem. Okay, so if I'm experiencing some grief and I start drinking just so I can let things go, so I can try to relax, and I start doing this every weekend, and then I'm months in and I'm still drinking every weekend, and now I'm starting to drink during the week. I started missing work. My solution of having those few drinks has now become my problem. Okay, those are things that can happen, but it came from a way of protecting myself, trying to take care of myself, but it can grow into something else. And that's sometimes what we see when we see that anger that shows up. That anger that shows up as a client, that anger that shows up when I come to work and I've just had some things that I've had to deal with my family, or with things that are happening with the tribe that can remind us of different things that have happened. So those are the day-to-day impacts that we can see. This also includes us having that unresolved trauma or grief. And I appreciate you sharing how this information wasn't always accessible. And there was a lot more work that was done on the Holocaust at first, and then Maria Yellow Horse Braveheart and her colleagues were the one who coined the term historical trauma. And across the country for our Native people, that was really controversial. And some people had shared, I don't have that. That's just an excuse. And it's definitely real for us, but people have different levels in terms of what they've experienced in their lives or what their families have experienced and how their families have been able to adapt or move forward. But it was very controversial when it first started. But it's also been a way to name what's happening. And if we're able to it's a very simplified term that I'm going to use. I don't always use this, but one of my colleagues talks about it, name it to tame it. And I think there's value in that. There's a lot more to it because there's a lot of work and skill that you have to develop in order to tame it. But being able to know what I'm addressing makes all the difference in the world. If I know what I need to combat, if I know what I need to work on to change, that's where we start. With the intergenerational impacts, the families and communities have been torn apart across multiple generations. And although we work together, it's very common, at least in my tribe, for me, my grandparents raised me. That it wasn't because there was anything wrong with my mom. My mom was very engaged, but it was common for the first grandchild to stay with the grandparents. And we also have a lot of children who stay with their aunts or their uncles. So that's pretty normal. With the research that I've been a part of, we've learned that moving from family to family, even if it's biological family, can still increase rates of anxiety and depression for our little ones. And part of that is just that change in the system, the family dynamics, and learning different rules or just seeing different behaviors from our family members. So even though there can be the cultural values within that and us all supporting one another to raise our children, we do still have to be aware of those impacts in terms of when they go to another setting and what that means for them, as well as the other children that are in the home. Okay. There is definitely the forced culture, so kind of moving us into that assimilation, the parenting styles that we've seen change. And then just with my own personal example, with my grandfather, he had shared about going to school and being beaten whenever he spoke his language. So he didn't want us learning our language. And I remember him even telling me, I need to get off the reservation and marry a white man. And I didn't do that, but it was really hurtful to hear that and to know that that was his experience. And this was something that he carried with him the rest of his life. And as I started working on learning the language, it was really difficult. And I'm not fluent, I don't speak very much at all, but it's really difficult now because we also have some people that are there to correct you, but not in a supportive way. It's more of, you're not doing that right. You didn't say that right. You said that like a man. And then that, but it's not like there's not the correction there to support you in learning and growing in it. And so then I still start to pull back even more. Well, then maybe I just won't even try then. And so we see that a lot in terms of this is part of the trauma. And I'm going to talk about protective factors later, but this is important for us as we think about the culture and the loss of cultural identity, because that is a huge protective factor. And when I get to that slide, I can share specific examples of how those protective factors can actually save our lives. Some of the other symptoms that we might see with intergenerational trauma include substance abuse, low self-esteem, psychosomatic disorders. And when we say psychosomatic disorders, we're talking about things that we feel physically. So I might have a lot of stomach aches. Maybe I have headaches, or I'm just experiencing pain regularly. Hypervigilance is also something that we're definitely going to see. And when we say hypervigilance, that's having to just be aware of our surroundings. I need to pay attention. I need to have those bells on my door because I'm worried about someone breaking in. Yeah, that's hypervigilance. Unhealthy relationships and dysfunctional parenting. But some of that has become normalized because it's happened so much that we may not even recognize what makes a healthy relationship. And we got to back up a bit and start thinking about the respect, the communication, the boundaries that we have with one another. All of these things can be impacts of intergenerational trauma that not only affect our families and the way that we live and operate within our family system, it also impacts us at work. Because some of the things that we can see, if we think about the paranoia that we sometimes have with our jobs and the sustainability of us being able to keep grant-funded positions, but also, I know at least within my tribe, anytime we get new council, we're looking at new program directors, and when we look at new program directors, we're looking at new people having certain positions. So there's not anything that's going to be stable for us. All of that can lead to the hypervigilance, the psychosomatic disorders when I'm having to worry about paying my bills. It also can lead to substance abuse as well. Okay. Any thoughts on that? Yes. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, and part of that is because there is this basically a part of our brain that induces pleasure for us, and so that can happen with gambling. It induces pleasure for us, even if we're losing. Like, we're still going to have hope that we're going to win. It's also a way to just block out everything else and almost like dissociate. So I'm not worried about anything else that's happening. It's me and my machine. So that is something that is a solution that ends up becoming a problem for us too. So it is 12:16. I have 2 more slides before I have a break built in. So how about I go through these next 2 slides and then we can move to lunch? Okay.
I had a question on.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Just something I was thinking about with your last question was, I heard this on a, I don't know, I don't remember where I heard it from actually, but I heard it recently. Where there's some kind of a factor for mental health or for people that no matter how much money you're making, your income level or whatever, the way that you feel in like however category that you feel comfortable in,
Mm-hmm.
um, that you're never going to allow yourself to I guess live in a different income bracket or whatever, and so it's hard for you to change, and I can kind of agree with that, like
Mm-hmm.
to a certain extent, but I feel like when Nona mentioned that gambling is a huge factor too,
Mm-hmm.
just right up there with substance abuse. It's almost like like I wonder if that's the thought of the people gambling as well. I don't want to have to do anything with this money anyways. Like if I just get rid of it, then I don't have to worry about all the other problems of, how is that wealth going to be divided amongst the loved ones?
Mm.
So I don't know if that's part of it or not, or
Mm-hmm.
just food for thought, but it just
Mm-hmm.
made me think of that.
Yeah, that's a good thought, and it very well could be. It very well could be. There's also the piece of addiction with gambling and the way that it changes our brain too. But I think you're absolutely right in terms of the additional meanings behind me spending this money. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Oops. Let's see. Okay, so historical trauma. We know that we've had forced removal from our homelands. We've gone through boarding schools. We've had to deal with assimilation, also forced sterilization, and just things that are dehumanizing to us as people. When we think about mascots, even, that's not celebrating us as a people. And it ends up turning into a joke, and it's very dehumanizing. Or the things that Disney does, not just to us, but to other people. So there's a lot of things that are dehumanizing to us as Native people. But where I want us to really go into and focus on is historical resilience. Culture, collectivism, relationships, endurance, adaptability. These are all things that we can actually thrive in, that we have thrived in. Because if we look at where we were moved to, the things that have happened to our people, and we're still here, and we're still supporting one another, and our thoughts about how we care for our communities are very different from Western society. When we think about government, the US government, and how it's very hierarchical. We have that hierarchy here within our tribal communities, but there is still that strong collectivist value with us to where we're caring for our families. So these are things that are part of our resilience. And this would include protective factors. Now, this one is hard to see, and I don't think I put that one in your slide. So let me read these off to you. Enculturation, that's how involved I am with my culture. Interconnection, tribal language, ceremony and powwow, spirituality, and ethnic identity. That's from a particular study that was done. It was actually a literature review of a ton of studies that were done about protective factors for Native people, and I'm going to come back to this section. Then we also have identification with culture, which is going to be enculturation, family, connection with the past, traditional health practices, adaptability, wisdom of our elders, and spiritual orientation. So you can see there's an overlap there. But with this particular study, what they have found is how each of these things can contribute to specific areas of our life. So with the interconnection and spirituality, we can be looking at a reduction in suicidal ideation as a result. We can be looking at, through ceremony and powwow, we can be looking at a reduction in the symptoms of depression. When we talk about interconnection, we're looking at a reduction in symptoms of anxiety. And this is what we've been able to find with our Native people in terms of how important these protective factors are for us that come back to our culture. They can heal. They can change those diagnoses that we have with depression, with anxiety, with PTSD. So our protective factors that are already alive and well within our communities are something that we need to lean into to support one another. Any thoughts on that? Mm-hmm. Mhm. 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 Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Any other thoughts on the protective factors and then being a part of our culture? Yes. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you all so much. Let's go ahead and take our lunch break, which will be more than 10 minutes, but that's where we are for now. So I'll turn it back over to you, Ms. Gu.
We just go ahead and go on the prayers that were said at the beginning of the day, and we can go ahead and have the elders and me go eat first. I've got some good food here, so thanks to all those who rushed around to get that melting cow. So if you guys want to eat, we can finish up the rest of the presentation.
Right. Thank you.
Good job so far, Dr. Warrior.
Thank you.
Grab yourself something to eat.
Okay.
Earlier, but I wanted to do. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. I'm happy to see you. A long time.
Oh, I always
Like,
try to keep track, though. I kind of like watch it, through your little counseling and stuff.
oh, yeah. Uh-huh. Oh, good. Oh, I'm glad. Good, good.
Jump up in line. Sit for so long and I start to.
Mm. So what he called his place there, or where they got the food from? Milk and Cow?
Was it Milk and Cow? Is that what they said?
Milk and Cow?
Okay.
Ah.
Is that that new one in Sioux City?
Hmm.
Really? Okay, check it out now. I gotta have a lot of that. I know, she gets back. She gets back. Between those two. Oh, her too? Oh, she's a smoker. Bronchitis every year.
Hi.
Do you?
I don't know what I want to do.
I know, I don't know what is what, but I'm gonna try. I suppose that he said marry a white man, I have a picture of Trev.
That's the best I could do, Grandpa. And he's just resi as hell. No. That's funny. I hope so. Oh yeah, it said barbecue sauce on there.
Do you want me to grab you one? Okay, sorry, Anitra.
Nope, you're fine.
No, you gotta go to the back of the line. Yeah, I'm just kidding, Kev. You know I love you.
I know you do.
Mhm.
Right? Protein. From all that. And here I brought spaghetti for lunch today.
You better make your own.
This is barbecue, right?
Oops, sorry.
Mhm. Okay. I'm gonna eat fast and then start presenting again. So we can get through everything. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I have to go. I have to take kids.
Oh,
But
okay.
your thing is really good. It's like what you were talking about workers.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even know, till I came here that and I'm taking these things for my kids that I pick up and I take them for home visit to the parents. Anyway, so like I didn't even know until I came to work here that a lot of my coworkers that they won't even go into those buildings on the hill, like where human services used to be,
Mm-hmm.
and you had to. This person said, "Go take these papers up there." So I went up there here. And it's my generation. She said, "No." She was like this. I have to be able to call it. I said, "I don't know what's about this." She said, "I can't." She said, "I remember." She said, "We used to have where we used to eat and stuff." And she said, "How those nuns were dressed." And I never knew she was saying something about that. So
Mm-hmm.
it's true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and even now with them recovering bodies from other boarding schools, we've had I've talked with so many elders who were just like re-traumatized by it.
Yeah, I have to go get some kids.
Well, thank you for coming. I'm glad I got to see you.
I know, and I tell so if my grandma was alive, that's how old she would be. She was like 39, and my dad was like maybe that old. But he never went to boarding school. I'm real fortunate because they ran away. They used to travel,
Oh, wow.
always traveling and different places.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, take care. Hopefully, I see you again. Mhm. Okay, thank you all for the lunch. That was really good. We do have a lot of material to cover still, so please continue to eat, enjoy your meal, and I'm going to go ahead and start going through the rest of the presentation because we still have some more group work to do, but also a lot of content to cover as well. So as we get started, just a reminder of the group norms that we had talked about when we started the presentation. So we want to make sure that within our time together that it's safe, that there is inclusion so everyone's voice can be heard. Choice, you can choose to share, you can choose not to share, you can choose to participate, you can choose not to participate. And then respect, respect for choices, respect for inclusion of everyone's voice, and respect for the safety that we have, but also respect for everyone's lived experience. The other piece that we've added from contribution from the participants, everyone here, was to also listen. So let's make sure that we're having respect for what people are sharing and that we're listening to them and giving ourselves that opportunity to learn. Okay? Okay, let's see. That actually, we somehow jumped way ahead. Okay, so we've talked about where the historical trauma came from, what some of the impacts of it can be, the way that it can have an impact on our thinking, even our bodies, that it can lead to those headaches, it can lead to stomach aches or substance abuse, all these different things that can happen to us. Now let's spend a little bit more time talking about the impacts directly, and we'll start off by talking about the emotional and psychological effects. So one of the handouts I gave you is a window of tolerance. Has anybody heard of that before? The window of tolerance. Okay, awesome. So with this window of tolerance, let me finish reading that section. We can expect to see emotional numbness, depression, anxiety, which is also part of thinking styles. We're going to go through that as a handout as well. We can experience difficulty with concentration, decision making, and time management. We can also experience impacts from historical trauma in the workplace through interpersonal relationships. So this would be difficulty with effective relationships with colleagues and superiors, mistrust and difficulties in collaboration and teamwork, conflict resolution difficulties, but also self-esteem and confidence. So low self-esteem and self-doubt, and not seeking growth opportunities and limiting potential for professional development. Okay. So let's go back to the top and discuss the window of tolerance. So that's this handout. Now remember, we talked about with PTSD, it was when an event happens and it exceeds our ability to cope. So we're not able to cope with it, okay? But we all have coping skills that we can use. And what we know, what we're comfortable using, what we're able to lean into is going to be what's within that window of tolerance, okay? And there can be times that we go outside of that, but if we have skills, it can bring us back within this range, okay? When we don't have those skills, we can run into what's called hyperarousal or hypervigilance, okay? Now with hyperarousal, that's where it's going to be more of that fight. So have you all heard of fight, flight, freeze? And fawn is also one that's part of that. So that's actually a part of our brain. Within our brain, we have the sympathetic nervous system, the parasympathetic. The parasympathetic is where we have the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn thinking style. Okay, so if there's a traumatic event that happens, what's going to be more natural for me? Is it going to be to flee or is it going to be to fight? And sometimes when we get stuck in hyperarousal, we can see anxiousness, being angry, being out of control or overwhelmed. Your body wants to fight or run away. And it's not something you choose. It's just like automatic. And these happen because that's a part of who we are. When we don't have the coping skills or the education on how to get back to within this window of tolerance, we can stay this way. And remember earlier we talked about anger as a secondary emotion and how it's serving a function of protection. That's where we can stay. So we can see people being angry all the time or getting defensive all the time. And sometimes it can mean I can't even trust what's actually happening. I don't know if I can trust that you're trying to do something good here because I don't know what you're going to want back from me. I don't know how you're going to expect something else from me that might be more than what I want to do. So that can put you in that state of hyperarousal or just being aware. Then at the bottom of the window, we have hypoarousal. So when it's hypo, you can think of it as like a way to remember it. Hypo would be low, so just a quick mnemonic there. But with hypoarousal, when it comes to trauma that we've experienced, people can seem spacey, kind of like zoned out, numb, frozen. It can be like your body wants to shut down. And it's not, again, the same as the hyper. It's not something you choose. Your body just takes over. So this is something for us to keep in mind when we're thinking about historical trauma and the impacts that it has on families, but also in the workplace. I know in my tribal community, we have several people that anger is immediate, and sharing ideas, anger immediately steps in and they get defensive on that. Because if I'm sharing an idea or a colleague is sharing an idea, then what you're doing is you're telling me I'm not doing it right. You're telling me I'm not good enough. That's why I got to hear what you have to say. That's a way that it can come out, that hyperarousal can come out in the work that we do, okay? Any thoughts or feedback on that, whether it be within families that you've worked with or even in the workplace? Any thoughts on the window of tolerance? Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, you're absolutely right. They do have a smaller window of tolerance. It is almost easier, though, to help it expand because they're ready to learn. Like their brains are almost like in scientific mode, so they're little scientists, so they are ready to learn and practice things. The feedback they get from practicing those things can be where a challenge can come in. But thank you for sharing. Any other thoughts on the window of tolerance? Okay. So let's go to the next handout then. And this is going to be with unhelpful thinking styles. I'd like to give you a minute to read through these. And I'm not going to ask anyone to share, but I do want you to read through these and see what stands out for you. What seems like something that you've done personally. And this is just in life in general, not as an employee or a supervisor. I think there were extra handouts. I'm not sure where they are, though. Okay, so we all have unhelpful thinking styles. And it doesn't mean that we have every single one of these, but chances are we've experienced most of these in our lifetime. Now, when we've experienced trauma or we're going through a stressful event, these unhelpful thinking styles start to get stronger because we're trying to make sense of what's happening. We're also, again, trying to protect ourselves. So we can start to think about these things. So, for example, emotional reasoning, assuming that because we feel a certain way, what we think must be true. I feel embarrassed, so I must be an idiot. Those are things that we can see even with our colleagues. Just using the example that I just shared, sharing other ideas and the person internalizing that in terms of, so I must not be doing a good job. Well, then you do it then, and then can pull away. These are some of the things that we can see that impact our overall well-being, our interpersonal relationships. All or nothing thinking, the first one on here, is something that happens quite a bit, where I either have to do it right or it's completely wrong, and if I can't do it right, then I'm not doing it at all. And that can pull us back and have an impact on our self-esteem, our self-confidence. But this is an unhelpful thinking style that we've used to protect ourselves. Because if I don't even make myself vulnerable, if I don't even put myself out there to try, then I don't have to worry about failing. So I'm either going to do it right or I'm not doing it at all. And that can impact us in terms of productivity when we're at work. Mental filter. This one's important because what we do when we are using that mental filter is we're looking for things that will only support the belief that I have. So if I have a belief that someone doesn't like me, let's say if Anthony doesn't like me, then when he does something, let's say he didn't notice me and he just turned that way, I'm going to say, did you see him snap me off? I know he doesn't like me. And that was my mental filter at work. I'm only looking for what's going to support what I'm believing, okay? Jumping to conclusions. That one can happen a lot. There are two key types of jumping to conclusions. So mind reading, imagining that we know what others are thinking, and fortune telling, predicting the future. And that's something that we do quite a bit, is especially when we think we know people, that we're ready to say, well, I think this is what they were thinking, or this is probably what they were feeling. And it can also go back to that mental filter where I'm going to be thinking, this is what they think because they don't like me. And I know that that's the truth, okay? So none of our emotions are wrong. Our brain is going to work to protect us. But when it's doing that, it can be skewed, okay? So it's really important for us to pay attention to what our emotions are, and are we thinking through our emotion brain or our rational brain, okay? Because our emotions can lead us into different areas of protection that may not always serve us. Remember what I said earlier, our solutions can become our problems. That's what can happen when we're thinking through our emotions, okay? There have been times where we probably all have said things that we didn't mean when we were angry, but that was the emotion brain that basically took over. The way that I explain it to people sometimes is like this front part of your brain is where our executive functioning is. So this controls our thoughts, our decision making, and can help control our emotions. And I like to think of it as our emotions and memories being in the back of our brain, okay? Now, when we go to a place of trauma, or we're re-traumatized, or we experience trauma for the first time, or we just have difficulties in relationships, this front part of our brain here, the executive function, can actually slow down in terms of how it's working, because the back of our brain, those emotions and memories, essentially take over. So now all my decisions have to cloud through those emotions, okay? So those are things that we have to think about when we're looking at unhelpful thinking styles, when we're thinking about productivity in the workplace, how we're getting along with one another. Thinking styles and our window of tolerance can be two key components in understanding relationships and how we interact with one another. Okay. Any thoughts or feedback on this? Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, just at a glance, like I feel like I do each one of these from time to time. So
Mm-hmm.
like, there's a way you can look at it from that perspective, and then like flip it. So like, if you notice yourself like disqualifying the good things that happen to you or have happened, then just spend some time like really thinking about that, because it's probably not true.
Mm-hmm.
You probably can find pretty soon you have a big long list of good things, so.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like you could talk yourself out of just like you could talk yourself into every one of these, you could probably talk yourself out of it too.
Mm-hmm.
When
Mm-hmm.
it takes work.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right, we all have these different thinking styles. So this is not specific to any one person, or it's not specific to a diagnosis. This is just the way our brain works. So everyone has had these at one point or another. But like I said, when we experience trauma or conflict, they can get a bit stronger. So being able to name it is very helpful in being able to address it and change the way that we're thinking, or like you said, flip it to where we can use it to our advantage. Okay. Any other thoughts on thinking styles or the window of tolerance? Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Okay, so when these things are happening, okay, some of what we can see when it comes to the workplace is burnout and absenteeism. We've talked about that already, some of the burnout and how that can come about, but this is going to look like reduced engagement and increased absenteeism, lack of progress towards goals, lower organizational commitment, and higher turnover rates. Sometimes the turnover rates are out of our control, and I explained a reason as to why that can happen, but lower organizational commitment. I've heard several times through several jobs that I've had where that's not in my job description. I'm not doing that. That's not in my job description. That can be a reflection of the lower organizational commitment that we see that might be related to burnout and absenteeism, or it might be related to something beyond that in terms of the impacts of historical trauma. The other piece is going to be chronic stress. So we'll see difficulties concentrating and making decisions, difficulty managing time effectively, and increased illness. And that's something that I really want to stress is when people oftentimes think about stress or anxiety, we don't always acknowledge the physical impacts. Remember earlier we talked about psychosomatic disorders. So this increased illness is also going to happen because when we're experiencing stress, our immune system is not at full capacity. Okay, when it's not at full capacity, that's going to mean it's easier for us to catch colds, to catch other viruses, and just to have overall sickness. Okay, so experiencing that chronic stress, whether it be at home or at work, is really important for us to pay attention to as we support our clients, but also support our team members. So a couple questions for you all. How do you see the impacts of intergenerational trauma in the workplace? With everything that we've covered, what have you all seen? And it doesn't have to be your current employer, but things that you might have seen in previous jobs that you've had. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. I have a colleague that's in her 60s, and one of the things that she shares openly in presentations and just personally, because she really wants this to get out. So growing up, She was always told to be quiet or to shut up, that she didn't have a voice, that she was stupid, and it really impacted her. So when she would have a job, there was no chance of her speaking up. There was no chance of that happening. She's since then, in her 60s, has been a part of different mentorship groups that really focus on empowering Native people. And now she shares that, and she'll say, I don't have a degree, but I'm teaching something. And the person who has a degree will sometimes try to throw their weight around, but I know I have lived experience. I have my own story that I can tell, and I know that I can tell it in a way that relates to other people, to where it doesn't feel like you're talking at me, but we're talking together. And so these were things that she was able to embrace and share with others. That's made such a difference for the people that she's sharing, but for her own well-being. So think of all those years from the trauma that she was experiencing through her family, how that impacted her at work and held her back at work until she was able to go out and name it and start learning and sharing. Those things are really vital for us in terms of our success as individuals, as a tribal program, and as a tribe. Okay, so let's do a case study. You all should have a copy of this in your packet. I don't think, there should be some extra packets. I don't think we used them all up. I know I printed out like 25, so if you don't have one, you might have to share. I hope I put it in the packet. Did I not? Oh, no, I'm so sorry. Okay, I'm going to read this. I'm going to read it, and we can go back through it again if you need me to highlight anything, okay? But we're going to discuss this. Nope, not that one. It's just a copy of this, so I apologize. You know what? I did make a copy. I did make extra copies. Let me see. It's just so much text that I don't want it to just be up there. Let's see. It might be in this bag. Okay, thank you. Yeah, because I meant to cut them up. Oh my gosh, my trash bag. Hold on. Okay. I didn't get to cut them, so there's 2 on each one. Okay, so thank you, Marian. As she's passing those out, I'm going to go ahead and read this. So Charles is a 47-year-old male who was hired as a program assistant for a new prevention grant. During his interview for this position, Charles shared his experience being in foster care and how he struggled in school as a result. He reports this lived experience would help him be effective because he understands the system and the needs of the children in the community. When Charles was given guidance on partnering with CFS, he was angered and stated, "I know who to partner with for the youth." Charles was asked to participate in a training and he refused. He seems to be working alone more in the work he is doing and in team meetings. He rarely shares his opinion. Okay? So let's start off with first, what can we appreciate about Charles? So if we were to do the appreciative interview on him, start our foundation with his strengths. That's where we want to start. What would be something that we could appreciate about Charles in this scenario? His willingness to share, absolutely. What else can we highlight about Charles? I'm sorry? Yes, he has experience. So perseverance, too. So what might stand out to you if we switch gears now? We have a foundation of strengths for Charles, which is where we always want to start. What would stand out to you if you revisited the thinking styles or the window of tolerance? Based on what we've discussed, what would stand out to you from that? This is the application piece, remember I said I like to do. So what's standing out? Thinking styles or window of tolerance? That he struggled in school? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let's focus specifically on thinking styles then. Based on what we've said about Charles in this scenario, what might we be seeing with thinking styles? Okay. And so what would he be struggling with then to where that's his belief? Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, yeah. So there could be things that are happening for Charles when he's talked to about partnering. That we want to talk to you about who you can partner, how we can make things better. Remember the example that I gave earlier? Well, then if you want to share your stuff, then you just do it. I'm not going to do it. That might be something that we're seeing with him, and where he is on the window of tolerance might be that state of hyperarousal where he's got to be defensive. He's got to protect himself. And so we don't want to start making assumptions about that with people that we work with. The reason that I'm sharing this is for us to have an understanding, be inclusive of everyone's thoughts, make sure we're creating a safe environment, and also having choice and respect for people's lived experiences. So although we're not trying to provide counseling for Charles, we still want to have an understanding of who he is so we can lean even more into that foundation. Because even with the limited information that we have here, we were still able to highlight a number of strengths. That's where we always want to go first, okay? So there could be the all or nothing thinking. It's either going to be the way I do it or we're not going to do it at all because I know what my experience was and I know what works. We also have to remember that what works for one doesn't always work for all, okay? So us being able to have discussions are important. Anything else that might stand out to you in terms of working with Charles or how to address a situation like this based on what we've learned today? Okay. Something else for us to keep in mind is we don't have a timeline on here, but what we could also be concerned about in terms of working with Charles and knowing that he was a part of the foster care system. Again, we're not trying to provide therapy for him or anything like that, but paying attention to the other things that were reported. So he's working alone more. He's not as engaged in the team meetings, and he's not sharing his opinion. Remember, we talked about organizational commitment, and that's something that we can see reduce when people experience burnout. So what can happen in this situation? This is a cultural lens that I want you all to look through, is Charles may be taking on so much for all the kids in foster care. Like, I know what it's like. I know I can make a difference for all these babies. So he's taking on more responsibility for all these kids and might be going out and doing way more than he's emotionally equipped to, okay? So as supervisors and colleagues, we want to pay attention to that. And although we have people that are willing to just jump in and do things, we still need to check on them and make sure that they're doing okay, so we don't run into things like this where we do see the burnout, okay? Any thoughts now that I've shared that extra bit? Okay, we're going to come back to Charles a little bit later. We can skip that one. So the next one that I wanted to talk to you all about that I said was something that I really want everyone to hold on to is post-traumatic growth, okay? This is when negative experiences can spur positive change, including a recognition of personal strength, the exploration of new possibilities, improved relationships, a greater appreciation for life, and spiritual growth. Post-traumatic growth often happens naturally without psychotherapy or other formal intervention. It can be facilitated in 5 ways: through education, emotional regulation, disclosure, narrative development, and service. But through post-traumatic growth, one can emerge stronger. Okay. I've talked a little bit about my own form of growth. Remember when I talked about how the providers that I was working with actually caused more harm when it came to my healing? And I decided from that I'm going to start my own clinic, and I'm going to train people on how to work with Native people and understand how, or understand the role that our culture plays in healing. That's a form of post-traumatic growth. It doesn't always have to be something at that level, though. It can be a change within the family. I shared that my daughter had passed away, and prior to her death, my family was not very affectionate. We didn't say I love you. And now there is not one day that goes by that we don't say that. And we are always hugging. That is a part of post-traumatic growth as well. So that changed the way that our family interacts now. So growth can be something like that, how I interact with my family now. That is post-traumatic growth, okay? With historical trauma, so when it comes to something more specific for Native people, we're going to be looking at collective strength, so social cohesion and mutual aid. And what I love about this one is if you think about our events, whether it's something that's celebratory, a powwow, or a funeral, look at how many people get up and help. You know, even when we serve meals, you know, there's protocols for that. All of that leads into that collective strength. Those are part of our protocols that fall into those protective factors for interconnectedness. And remember, I shared that interconnectedness can also lead to that reduction in symptoms of depression, anxiety, reduced suicidal ideation. All that comes from something that we already do that's natural to us. We just have to be able to recognize it in that way. Collective and spiritual change, so ceremonies and rituals for restoration of hope, new possibilities for our destiny. I put decolonization on there. What I would also say in terms of decolonizing, and we're going to talk about that in a couple of other slides, is reclaiming. Okay, because we talked about through our history how things were just taken away from us, things were eradicated, even some stuff was considered illegal with what we did within our practices. But now we're in a state of reclaiming those things, and that makes a difference in terms of our destiny. So relating to our ancestors and culture, so that connection that we have, and that ties into our identity, and we talked about that as a protective factor. And then the appreciation for our lives. So the interconnectedness of mass group, which would be our entire tribes. Any thought when we see it from that lens, that Native lens, that indigenous lens? Any thoughts or feedback on that? Okay. Oh. Mm-hmm. I can just say, like, here's an example, like our grandmother, we have two of our grandmothers, one on the maternal side, one on the maternal side. One shared all of that, then the other didn't want to. Mm-hmm. Try to keep us safe from that, but we still learn both. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And if we can think a little bit deeper, and I don't know them, so I can't say for sure, but if we think about where they were individually in their healing, remember it all goes back to how we protect ourselves, but also protecting our families. And so not sharing to protect our family. Like for me, not learning the language because my grandpa wanted me to be successful, so that was his way of protecting me, you know. So there are all these different contributing factors to that, but thank you again for sharing. Any other thoughts? So as we go a little bit further with post-traumatic growth, and again, please take that term with you. Think about that in the work that you're doing in the community, how you're seeing it, name it and share it. Just like that appreciative interview that we did, we can do the same thing for our communities, for our organizations. It's really vital for us to overcome oppression and the trauma through those things. With his post-traumatic growth, you can also see social transformation. And in doing this work, in talking with Native elders, one of the things that they had shared was that there is no post. That we're still experiencing the trauma. We're still feeling those effects. There is still racism and discrimination, so many other things that are happening, violence, all of that continues to happen to our children and to our adults. So there is no post. We're still living the trauma. Systemic violence and discrimination, which I already mentioned, and then the mass group level growth and healing. So another example that I'll use that can be really sensitive is the MMIW or MMIR, and thinking about that. You know, for a long time, that wasn't addressed. And now this is more of a social transformation, and people are looking out for each other. There are groups that when someone is, I know for a couple of reservations that I've worked with, if they don't know where someone is, they can call this group and they start looking. They start going to people's homes. They start trying to find them even before the police are called. There's also all this recognition in terms of just bringing light to the fact that we have so many missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. This is a part of post-traumatic growth, having powwows to recognize that, getting information out, making sure we're sharing, making sure we're educating our relatives about being safe. This is all post-traumatic growth, okay? Could anybody give me an example of post-traumatic growth that we've seen here in this community?
Sobering up.
Sobering up, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So with sobering up, one of the things that we would see when it comes to post-traumatic growth is for those who have sobered up to become substance abuse counselors. That's post-traumatic growth. That can be post-traumatic growth. And being able to take over on the law enforcement, that also can be a form of post-traumatic growth because of what was taken from us and our own sovereignty being lost through that. So now that the strides are being made, and it'll happen tonight, that is a form of post-traumatic growth. One more form of post-traumatic growth that we've seen. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so reclaiming. Mm-hmm. Okay. So there are more and more studies that are happening in regards to post-traumatic growth. This term here was actually coined by Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun in the mid-1990s, but it's not shared as often as we would like. Okay, and remember earlier I had talked about it's easy for us to go into that rabbit hole of the negative. That's something that can happen a lot when we think about research that's done with our own people, and when we need to get funding, we just have to always focus on the negative. Okay, we need to bring up these things just as much as we focus on the negative, if not more. Okay, one of the studies that was done in 2013 looked at low-income mothers who survived Hurricane Katrina. And what they have found with them was that there was this new appreciation for life, a newfound sense of personal strength, and a new focus on helping others. That's post-traumatic growth at an individual level, but with a focus on helping others, that's how it can grow. Just like if someone gets sober, what they're able to do, even being a sponsor, is a form of post-traumatic growth, depending on their experience. Okay. The other piece that I want to share with this is that post-traumatic growth, it's different from resilience, okay? So resiliency is the personal attribute or ability to bounce back, okay? And resilient used to be the term that everybody wanted to grab onto, and Native people are resilient, you know, and it's unfortunate because you have to be. So it's like we just have to be cautious in terms of how we use that as the only value, because there's still more that comes after resiliency. That's where post-traumatic growth kicks in. So it can occur when someone who has difficulty bouncing back experiences a traumatic event that rocks them to their core. People experience a challenge to their core beliefs, the psychological struggle to make sense of the trauma, and ultimately, they can find a sense of personal growth through that. That takes work, though, okay? That takes work of understanding how trauma can affect us through that window of tolerance. Am I being defensive? Am I being open? Am I using skills? Or do I feel like I need to shut down? What's my core belief about myself? And then including our thinking styles. How is this all coming into play with how I'm interpreting the world and what my interactions look like? All of that comes back into play. You can see this a lot when we have people who go into the field, the different fields based on their trauma. So for me, when I went into the field of psychology, I had every intention of working with mothers who had lost children. That actually wasn't a good fit for me. That wasn't something that worked well, but I did find that I could thrive in working with children, but not so much the grieving part. And I did try to do that, but it just wasn't a good fit. So that's something else that we have to think about is, where am I growing? How did I grow? Okay, so those things can change based on our experience. Okay, I did have another break built in, but I want to make sure we get through everything because we still have some action planning to do. So I'm going to have us skip our break if you guys are okay with that. But please take a bio break if you need to. Feel free to get up, move around. Just a reminder of our norms again: safety, inclusion, choice, respect, and listening. So we are on our final leg of the presentation. So the things that I want to highlight, these are going to be more in terms of what we can see when it comes to leadership and the impact that that can have when we're talking about historical trauma and the impacts on the workplace. So there are several types, but the ones that I pulled out are the transformational leadership, delegative, authoritative, transactional, participative, and servant leadership. So with transformational, what we're looking at there is going to be more of the leader having a focus on the future. They want to transform things. They want to see change happen. And they really try to focus on people's potential, okay? Then with the delegative, that's the least intrusive form of supervision or leadership style that we can see. Those types of leaders are really hands-off. They trust and rely on their employees. They don't get too involved in providing feedback or guidance. But you have to really pay attention to each of the leadership styles because there's pros and cons. So remember I shared about the woman who was in her 60s and not speaking up, not saying anything, just really trying to avoid conflict as well. So if things weren't working for her, and I had the delegative leadership style, those wouldn't really mix well, okay? Because she might need more of the hands-on. She might need more of the guidance instead of the offhand approach that a delegative approach can take. So those are things for us to keep in mind. The authoritative is more of a visionary. They mentor, they motivate and inspire others. They do provide direction, guidance, feedback. They promote that sense of accomplishment. The drawback on that one can be when you're so involved and doing your best to help as the leader and really want to support every win that they have, it can almost start to feel like micromanaging. Because even though I'm trying to come at it with good intentions and see the good that you're doing, like I'm watching everything that you're doing and I'm giving you feedback on everything that you're doing. So there's a lot of pros to that style, but there's also the drawbacks. So again, we just have to monitor how we're doing that. With the transactional, that's really about the reward and punishment. So within my field, in a lot of clinics, we have productivity. So you have to see a certain number of relatives or have a certain number of sessions. And if you do, sometimes you get different rewards. But it can be different for people when they're seeing twice as many as someone else and they get the same reward. That can start to diminish morale. So if it's reward and punishment, there's a lot of value to that, but we just have to pay attention to what those rewards are and how they can diminish returns, okay? Participative is going to be where we're involving team members in decision making, good communication skills, sharing power and responsibility, and then really supporting the team effort. And then servant. So that's going to be putting the needs of others first, developing employee skills, understanding employee personal goals, focus on ethical decision making, and really trying to do what's right for everyone when it comes to servant leadership. And that can be really empowering for team members, especially when they're working towards other goals. When we have, people, and we have a lot of this in our tribal communities, our non-traditional students who are working somewhere, but they're also going to school. A servant leader could really be supportive in that in terms of helping them reach their goals, looking at what are the hours, where can we be flexible, what do our policies allow, but that can be a really empowering form of leadership. I share these with you because, again, as I talked about with the delegative, not every leadership style works with every person. So we need to be aware of these things. And when we think about historical trauma in the workplace, what works for me as a leader, what works for me as a colleague, and what type of leadership is best for me as an employee. Those are important things for us to understand as well. And so we'll talk some about supervision, I think, on the next slide. But when you go into a position, that's important for you to take note of is who do I work well with? How do I thrive? And if there are things about this leader style that don't work for me, like how can we accommodate one another? How do we work on this collaboratively so we can both be successful? Okay. So now I'm going to talk about training and supervision. And this is really based on what we've put together for clinicians, but it can apply to any field when it comes to supervision. Because how many of us have actually received training on how to be an effective supervisor? Not a lot, though. I mean, we might have one or two, but not a lot. And even within our training programs, this type of training isn't always offered. And with supervision, when it comes to the different ethnic backgrounds or races, we can see that hierarchy come into play when there is a lack of understanding of who we are as cultural beings or as Native people, African American, Black American. There can be so many different beliefs and experiences that contribute to how we work and how we interpret supervision. So in our model that we created, we think about the protection of our employees or our providers. And that's going to be paying attention to microaggressions, the secondary trauma and burnout, what we talked about with Charles in the scenario, recognizing the power differential and the stage of development, okay? That one is of particular importance because we may have within our team a 20-year-old and a 35-year-old who are coming in at the same day, going through the same training, but their lived experience is going to be so dramatically different that we shouldn't expect the same from the both of them, okay? We can expect different characteristics to shine through. Then adapting what our facilities look like. And that's really important because having something that's so gray, that's so institutional, that's not a good fit for us. And I know even here that there are people, and I think I shared this earlier, who were like, I can't even look at this building because of what I went through. And so imagine having to go in there and work. So those are things that we want to pay attention to. And how are we making our spaces reflective of us to show that we belong, to show that inclusion, okay? The other thing that we think about with adapting as we're addressing historical trauma and the impacts in the workplace, we also want to think about the policies and procedures of our clinic, or I'm sorry, of our organization. With that, remembering our own sovereignty. Like, we make the policies here. We decide how we work. One of the things within our clinic is we have someone who is on our team that has often been called to be in charge of funerals. And so part of our policies are that you get that time off plus an extra day to just rest. And you don't have to take leave for that time, but you can get, as soon as you're notified that you're doing that, from then on, you get that time off with that extra day. And that's just a part of being empowered and empowering our employees and not letting the Western time frame take control of how we operate within a cultural world, okay? Then how we provide supervision. So kind of re-indigenizing it and thinking about these different styles, but what works for us as people. Looking at different models to review. There are so many different models of supervision. You can literally Google models of supervision and you will find that there are several with, let me see, the collaborative approach, so using cultural knowledge as a specialty. We've been able to talk about that here when we did our appreciative interviews and what we're willing to share. And that being a cultural value is it's not something that's boastful, but we do have that responsibility to share so we can keep those things alive. And then also paying attention to systemic and societal norms, because what we can see are the conflicting worldviews. So we had a clinician that was non-native and came and worked with our clinic, and she had almost no people that she was seeing because she wanted everything done exactly within a time frame. I mean, everything. So it set up a lot of barriers because we sometimes have to go to the homes to get consent to work with our relatives. We have to try multiple times when it comes to follow-up. We have a lot of no-shows. And for her, it was a no-nonsense approach. And this is how clinics work. If you don't show this many times, you're off my caseload. And we don't do that. We're focusing on building the relationship so there can be trust there. So those are some systemic and societal norms that we have to pay attention to when people are coming into our communities to work and don't have a full understanding of who we are or how our community operates, what are community norms. All of those things can come into play. Also understanding the role of historical trauma, and then understanding privilege, okay? So privilege is so broad. Remember when we first started, I said, I talked about bias and that I'm going to read directly from the slides because I don't want to have that bias that everybody can read everything that's up there, everyone can see it, everyone can process it at the same time. That's a form of privilege that I have because I can see, I can read these things, I can hear okay, and all of that comes into play. So privilege can come in so many different ways, and it's important for us to keep that in mind. Any question on leadership or supervision styles? Okay. So now that we've talked about that, we're going to move into some communication. So some strategies for us to have healthy communication when we're talking about historical trauma and the impacts that has on our community, on our employees, on our relatives, is going to be trauma-informed communication. So we want to make sure that there's safety and trust, empathy and respect, and active listening, but also giving choice. And from what we shared, when we did the appreciative interview, all of those things were up there. So that's already here. Lean into that for healthy communication. Okay, remember those values, those attributes that were shared by each of you in terms of what you possess, what you share, how you operate. That was really powerful to see that and can be used in healthy communication when we're dealing with or addressing historical trauma. So cultural consciousness and allyship. So just being culturally aware and being an ally is necessary, so supporting. So one thing that I would highlight when it comes to cultural awareness is I've worked with people from that grew up here, that live in other places and don't want anything to do with the culture, don't ever want to come home. And so I need to respect that. That's not my job to say, well, this is a Ho-Chunk value or this is a Winnebago, value. That's not my role to say that. I need to respect where they are and have cultural awareness in terms of what they've identified with. Okay, so sometimes people can try to force that on others, even if that's not something that they want. Okay, even though we know the benefits, we've talked about those as protective factors. We've talked about how it literally can save lives through those protocols. There are some people that are not there, and we just have to respect that. Okay, respect their choice. Intergenerational community, so our communication. So we have to be flexible and willing to adapt, and we also want to avoid stereotypes. And I think especially now with the changes in society, with social media, AI, all of these things that are coming up, we really want to be able to be flexible and adapt and learn. We have to continue learning when it comes to communication styles. I remember several years ago with texting, a person came into my session and they were so upset because they were talking to their friend, and when they put a period at the end of the sentence, that meant they were done, they were upset, and I'm like, from proper grammar? That's, but that was something that I had to learn and become flexible in that and really try to understand, okay, with this generation, what are the differences in how they communicate? Because I can't expect them to try to follow my proper grammar, which is not proper anyway, but that's how they communicated. So we have to be able to understand that with who we work with and who we work for and how we work together. Then we want to have non-judgmental interactions. So focus on behaviors, not attributes. So with that, it's, what am I doing? Am I coming in late all the time? And what does that mean? How is that impacting us in terms of productivity? But also go back to the strengths. Remember, we don't ever want to lose those strengths. We also want to make sure that we're using calm and controlled communication when we're talking with others, because when it comes down to the trauma, the historical trauma, and remember we talked about anger being so present for so many, there are a lot of people within our tribal communities who are averse to, or that it's really difficult for them to have conflict or confrontation. And confrontation doesn't always mean a negative thing. It kind of gets a bad connotation in terms of like he confronted him and so he was yelling at him. Confrontation is just addressing the issue at hand, okay? And how we do it is what's going to be important. I'll give an example of like non-judgmental interactions. So we had a little one who had wanted to start counseling with us, and we called the grandma. And when we let the grandma know who we were, she called the little one in there and she said, "You're not trying to do counseling, are you?" And he was like, "No, who are they?" But he was the one who initiated it. But it was that approach, okay? There was judgment in that tone. It wasn't safe. It wasn't calm. So he didn't move forward with services, okay? The other example could be if we say we're asking someone, "Are you about suicide?" Okay, so if it's, "Are you thinking about killing yourself?" So my tone is calm there, but if I come at it as, "Are you thinking about killing yourself?" That changes it dramatically, okay? So when we talk about historical trauma and the impacts and how we interact with one another in the workplace, our tone, the judgment that comes behind that tone, all of that makes a difference, okay? Any thoughts on communication? Ooh, I still got a lot of slides to go through, so, okay. Communication styles. There are a lot of communication styles. I'm only going to highlight 3. Passive, aggressive, and assertive. So passive communication is where we prioritize needs, wants, feelings at our own expense. Okay, so we don't express or stand up for our own needs. We can be soft-spoken or quiet, and we might lack confidence. With aggressive, it's going to be expressing only their needs. So I'm only expressing my needs, my wants, my feelings. I could be easily frustrated and interrupt when people don't listen. Then it can also be disrespectful, using criticism, humiliation, or domination. With assertive communication, we emphasize the needs of self and others. We stand up for our own wants and needs while respecting others. We listen without interruption. We're willing to compromise and clearly can state needs and wants. Okay, so these are some communication styles that we want to think about when we're noticing or seeing that somebody might be outside of that window of tolerance. Okay, they might be in a state of hyperarousal. I want to make sure that I have an assertive approach in terms of how I communicate with people. Okay, so assertive, of course, is going to be the best way to communicate. We don't really actually ever want to go into passive or aggressive, but these are some communication styles that we see. And if we think about the impacts of trauma, what's been passed down from generation to generation, we can see these passive and aggressive forms of communication happening. Okay, and that will come out in the workplace as well. So we have a scenario here that we're going to talk through really quickly. So a friend asks to borrow your car, and this will be a big inconvenience for you. Okay, so the passive way to address this with passive communication would be, yeah, I guess that's fine. Do you need me to fill up the tank? Okay, they're putting their needs first. Okay, that's an inconvenience for them to loan out their car, but they're saying, okay, and I'll fill up the tank for you. Then aggressive is, no way, why would I let you borrow my car? You're crazy to even ask. Okay, so remember there's that humiliation there that's happening, being kind of dominant in their approach. And then the assertive way is going to be, I need my car that day, but I'll have time to drop you off. Okay, so there was some compromise there. It's clearly stating their needs, that they needed the car that day, but willing to compromise and saying, I can drop you off. Okay, so now we're going to practice. We'll make it really quick, okay? We won't break into groups for this. So let's practice. Your boss tells you to stay late to prepare a booth for the upcoming community event. Everyone else is leaving. You're always the one who stays late, and tonight you have plans. What might be something that would be said passively? What time do I need to set up, and what do you want me to bring? Yeah. Okay, what about aggressive? Yeah, not today, or I always stay late. What would be an assertive way to address this? And remember, you have plans. So what would be an assertive way to address this? Yeah. Yeah. So you shared your needs, but you also looked at a plan for compromising. And that's what we want to see with being assertive and that type of communication. Okay. So now we're going to move into self-care. So when I talk about self-care, I really like to refer to it as self-sustainment because one, the connotation with self-care can often be like the nails, the baths, all of that, which that's really important for us too, to be able to take that time, be mindful, be present. But when we get down to it, to the nitty-gritty of what self-care is, it's so we can sustain ourselves, okay? So this is going to include so many different things like your medical appointments, the food that you're eating, whether or not you take vitamins, your physical activity, your sleep, your relationships. All of these things come into play when we're talking about self-care, okay? So I have in your handouts, let me go ahead and go through this one really quick. Self-care is the ability of individuals, families, and communities to promote health, prevent disease, maintain health, and cope with illness and disability with or without the support of a health worker. So this is something that you're able to do independently as well. Okay, so this self-care wheel is what is in everyone's packet. So I'm going to, let's see, we got 12 minutes here. I'm going to have you all go through that really quickly. Give you just a second to look at all the different domains that can be a part of self-care. Have any of you seen this self-care wheel before? Okay. Do you all not have, Marian, do we have any extra packets? Or have they been? Can we have 2 over here, please? 2? Thank you. So you can see in here we have physical, psychological, emotional, spiritual, personal, and professional. What I think about as well is going to be the environment that we're in and what environments we choose to be in. So if we're talking about someone who's struggling with sobriety, we don't want them hanging out at the bar, okay? That's going to be the environment. And then socially, of course, and that's going to fall into like the personal, where we are and who we're spending our time with. And sometimes we have to have boundaries when it comes to even our family members in order to care for ourselves, to sustain ourselves, the work that we're doing, our healing. We have to have those boundaries in place, okay? We're not going to have time to do this because we still have let me see, we have a few more slides to get through. So in your packet, though, you do have a form for you to create your own self-care plan. And that's going to look at what you can do intellectually in terms of continuing to learn, continuing to challenge how you think, emotional, occupational, environment, community, physical, financial, and spiritual. Did you have a question? Mm-hmm. 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 Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing. And yeah, that self-care was sustainment for you. It was a way that you were able to sustain yourself. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so we'll have this as homework then, your self-care action plan. Please work on that and look at things that you can do in each of those domains to sustain yourself. And what I also want you to think about when it comes to the self-sustainment or the self-care action plan is I want you to think about balance, but think about balance as action. And sometimes there may be times where at this stage in my life, I need to have more in spiritual. And I can, let some go in terms of what my community involvement might look like, but I really need to lean into the spiritual. So think about when you hear balance, think about it as action and what do I need at this stage or this season of my life, okay? The other piece to this when it comes to self-care or self-sustainment is organizational care. And you've already shared in terms of Winnebago having a self-care plan, basically, or what is it, a program? Mm. Awesome, awesome. So that fits because organizational self-care is a proactive, systemic approach where an organization implements policies, structures, and a supportive culture to foster a healthy work environment for all employees, moving beyond individual responsibility to more of a collective support. And that's exactly what it sounds like is happening. Okay, so now we're going to go back to Charles. So everyone has that handout. I'm going to read it one more time. Charles is a 47-year-old male who was hired as a program assistant for a new prevention grant. During his interview for this position, Charles shared his experience being in foster care and how he struggled in school as a result. He reports this lived experience would help him be effective because he understands the system and the needs of the children in the community. When Charles was given guidance on partnering with CFS, he was angered and stated, "I know who to partner with for the youth." Charles was also asked to participate in a training and he refused. He seems to be working alone more in the work he is doing, and in team meetings, he rarely shares his opinion. So with what additional information that we've learned now, what might be a way that we could provide some supervision or leadership to Charles? And what might be something that we can say to him in an assertive way? Shall we put the boss on the spot? No, I'm just kidding.
Get his opinion unless you're patient, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So if it says there he rarely shares his opinion, we just got to be a little bit more patient and maybe follow up with him one-on-one maybe,
Mm-hmm.
and just kind of understand that he might not tell you right away. Maybe there might be a way to in the discussion you're going to have with him to kind of elaborate a little bit more on what you heard in the interview where he said that he knew how to help those children because he was one of them.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
be a little bit more patient with that and giving him the ability to kind of articulate what because he's feeling the system as he's 47 years old. He still is kind of partially working with the system, so it's almost like he's there with his abuser, really. Like, he sees the system as being a challenge to him
Mm-hmm.
in his upbringing.
Mm-hmm.
Then yeah, he's contending with all that. So we got to be patient and we got to change that environment for him. One-on-ones, or maybe just put him in tandems with others, either randomly or like when you put people in groups, you get strengths and weaknesses from the group, and maybe that he might not mesh well like with the smaller group.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's
Mm-hmm.
what I would try to do.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And I love that you went back to going back to his strengths, because we talked about that, like how we use the appreciative interview. That's our foundation. So this is Charles' foundation, the strength that's there from his lived experience, his willingness to share, so his own post-traumatic growth in trying to make a difference because of his own experience. That's a foundation for us to build on. So being able to share all of that with him, whether it be in a one-on-one or in a group, as a small group, as you mentioned, that can be really helpful in using assertive communication in terms of recognizing those strengths, sharing that you want to hear from him because you know he has the knowledge and experience, and the team can all benefit from what he has experienced and what we can learn from him. That would be an assertive way of being able to talk with Charles. Okay. So we won't do the small group discussion. We have just a couple of slides left, and this is going to be the action piece of it, which unfortunately we won't be able to get through a lot. So 3 pieces of this when it comes to addressing generational trauma, historical trauma, is looking at communication, interaction, and our environment. And what we have to think about as an organization is, what does this mean for us at an individual level, an institutional level, and a system level? Now, as we apply it to our tribes, this would be like the institution level would be more of like our tribal programs. The system level is going to be what we can see with the tribe and things that we could expect from them to start addressing some of the generational trauma as well as the historical trauma. So that's going to include for the individual, and actually at all levels, education, doing some introspection and learning about yourself and what are my thinking styles? What is my window of tolerance? Where do I go when I'm confronted about something, whether it's good or bad? Does that take me into hyperarousal? Do I get defensive? So that introspection has to happen. And then being able to use mindfulness in terms of, okay, this is what I notice about my body when I'm confronted, and this is what I can do to address it. At the institution, so within our program levels, looking at what we're teaching about this and how that's incorporated in terms of how we work with one another, doing research to study the impacts, and that's part of what's already happening. Like this would count as part of that research and learning about historical trauma, the types of historical trauma and how it impacts us, and then activism, being able to call out these different things that have an impact on us. And then at the larger scale with the tribe, creating avenues like Ho-Chunk Renaissance, where there's a way to reclaim but also share history, also continuing to advocate and then providing support. So through this, what our plan was for us was to look at and spend some time working on this, the action plan. So that will be some more homework in addition to your self-care plan, your self-sustainment plan. We'll also have an action plan for addressing generational trauma in the workplace. So you all have this as a handout in your packet, and it's going to look at communication, interaction, and environment, but it's going to look at for you, for your program, and for your tribe. Okay. Ooh, 201. So I will just ask that you all work on this on your own, and maybe this can be something that you eventually share within your tribal programs or share with your colleagues as something to discuss. And now the last thing that we have is for us to do our giveaway. So if you created any items and you'd be willing to share, again, choice, you don't have to share if you don't choose to, but would anybody be willing to share what they're planning to give away? Oh my gosh. Okay, well, we respect choice, so no one is obligated to share, but I do hope that that's something that you'll keep with you as a cultural practice that you can do in the workplace and give to people that you want to recognize, that you want to honor, that you want to just show gratitude for, okay? And then an evaluation. So if you all wouldn't mind taking, it would be less than a minute to complete the evaluation. You can scan this QR code and it'll take you to a form. There's just a few questions on there, maybe 7 or 8, if that, but just that would be very appreciated and will help us improve with anything that we need to. And that is it for my presentation. So thank you all so much for spending several hours with me today. Thank you all.